I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
This is the social and political history through the prism of wine. This life, death, pregnancies, disasters, everything is in there, the light and shade of Australian life.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Angus Hughson has played a pivotal role in shaping the voice of Australian wine. As a respected wine writer and publisher, he possesses a keen understanding of what the local wine scene needs to evolve, and he takes deliberate action to make it happen. A mentor to many and a friend to most, I'm so honoured to have him join me today. Good morning, Angus.
Good morning, Shanteh. Thank you for those very kind words, most of which I think were true.
Well, it is very true. You've been a wonderful mentor of mine. Gave you my first ever gig putting pen to paper and writing about wine, which I am forever grateful, despite what you might say. And it's just lovely to have you and to be able to share your story, which is a fascinating one. In saying that, let's go back a little bit to kind of where you grew up and how you kind of found your way into wine.
Okay, so I was born in a central Queensland mining town. My dad ran the biggest black coal mine in the world, so a very long way from the wine industry. But it was a pretty tough place in the 70s, and my family did not want to bring, well, my parents didn't want to bring up children there, essentially. So Dad got a job in Sydney, and I moved to Sydney in the kind of late 70s and, lived up in the northern suburbs. And, northern suburbs, Shanteh, as you know, it was pretty white and Anglo in those days, and it was, there wasn't much culture around, one would suggest. And while I was there, my mum used to buy Gourmet Traveller magazine, and she used to make wacky food. And it wasn't particularly wacky, but compared to a lot of the other people, it was a bit wacky. And so I would go to people's houses and I would just never eat. I would never. So these parents in the nice northern suburbs of Sydney would make me some food, and I would just never eat it because I was just kind of used to eating kind of interesting food. And I think that experience with my mum probably gave me a palate. In a way, it gave me a taste, or it gave me a wide-ranging kind of taste in a way. And then early university days, obviously, drinking was involved, and but I found wine actually quite quickly. And some friends and I, we went to the Hunter Valley, some of which are still in the wine trade. And I was doing a science degree at Sydney Uni at the time, and I just remember tasting these wines. I'm like, why does this taste different from this one? Like, well, they're both Chardonnay. Shouldn't they taste the same? And then I started reading about it. I started, hearing about the concept of terroir and different winemaking. And it was actually probably more the scientist in me kind of was activated and went, wow, that's pretty interesting that these things taste differently. But then it also connected with that palate experience that I had. And then I, like a lot of us who get into the wine trade, we read it, we suck up everything we can, we vacuum everything up, we go to as many tastings as we can. And I didn't really travel much, but really Sydney had quite a few kind of tastings in the 90s, and I would just go to everything I could and taste everything I could, and just, I became a keen amateur, and I would drag my friends and girlfriends to all kinds of crazy wine stuff, and they seemed to like that.
I can see curious Angus. I can also see you not eating at people's houses and everyone thinking, well, this tall, slim guy needs feeding. And you're thinking, gross, I don't want to have that tuna casserole.
Yeah. Or it's like an overcooked steak and veg, that's blackened. And I'm like, I'm not, they probably didn't think that. They probably thought this boy is incredibly rude to come to our house and say no to the T-bone steak.
Well, I already love your mum. She sounds fabulous. Tell me, you did go on to study a PhD in psychology of wine tasting. Now, if I had known that was a thing, I probably wasn't capable of doing it, but I would have been interested. Tell me a little bit about that.
Look, Shanteh, I'm sure you were capable. I have no doubt you would have been capable. I mean, I love wine, but psychology always fascinated me. And I thought about being a clinical psychologist, and I even did counsel. I did like lifeline counselling. And so I really kind of got into it. But it seemed a bit depressing to me, to be honest. And then I did an honours degree in psych at Sydney University, and my thesis was on rat models of anorexia. And I spent my thesis year just watching rats running in wheels and doing data. And I'm like, this really isn't very interesting, this psychology thing. So. But I got first class honours and I got a scholarship. And so my supervisor said, you've got this scholarship to a PhD. You can hang around Sydney University for 3.5 years. We'll pay you enough money to survive and you can study whatever you want, kind of thing. But he said, he knew I was into wine. He said, there's one person has done a PhD on how taste perception works with relation to wine and psychology in 1990 at Harvard. Would you like to be the second person that does it? And I was like, 3.5 years, hang around university, didn't really have anything else better to do in a way. And I just thought, that sounds like a really fun thing to do. And it was. And it was just fascinating. And it was about cognition. So the concept, this very simple concept was, what is expertise? Okay, so think about a chess expert or a medical diagnostic expert. They don't have better eyes. They don't have better ears. They just have information processing systems set up to understand the stimulus, kind of thing. But wine, I'd always thought, well, these wine people, they must be amazing tasters. They must have like super palates, which are how they do this. And that's kind of seemed quite obvious. Obviously now I know it's obviously not the case, but I kind of went, well, there's this question to answer. Is wine tasting about information processing or is wine tasting about kind of perception? And so I spent 3.5 years doing that. Really didn't, the wine trade still really wasn't thinking about it until quite at the end. But something kind of happened. I got a scholarship to present a paper at a top sensory science symposium in Dijon. Right, so in Burgundy. So I went to Burgundy and I was just floored by it. I'd only been to the Hunter Valley before that, to be honest, but I was just floored by just the green and just the massive vines and the golden slope, the famous Côte d'Or, and we're having lunches in castles and we're living the chateau life. And I went to visit some, and I was like, wow, this wine industry. Suddenly it started to grab my heart. And pull at it quite strongly. But I still was kind of undecided. But then world events took over. So it's September the 11th, 2001. My brother's living in New York City at the time. I'm watching television late at night after writing papers, and I see September the 11th happen in front of me. Basically, I'm watching it all live on TV because I was up late at night and I'm up till like 6 a.m. watching this, and I'm ringing my brother saying, you should really probably get out of that building you're in. And then after that, I just went, life's short. You don't know when it's going to end, so you may as well do something you want to do. And I'd come back from Burgundy about 4 weeks before, and I just went at that moment. I said, I'm going to be a wine person, and I'm going to hand in my PhD in 1 year today on the 11th of September 2002. And then I'm going to be a master of wine. I'm going to move to London, and I'm going to learn to be an MW. And that decision from being a kind of a guy into wine to deciding to make that step happened over like a 4-week period.
God, fascinating. I mean, I love that, your experience was the Hunter and then Burgundy, because I think a lot of us go, oh wow, this is a serious thing. Like, people take it serious, really seriously. But incredible that those life events, kind of came into play for really kind of not forcing your hand, but making something so decisive happen. You did move to London. What was your experience over there?
Look, London, it sounded so romantic initially. I'm going to go to there and they drink all this great wine. I couldn't afford to eat for the first 3 months. Basically, I was living in London. I was getting subsidised rent from who is now my wife's good friend over there. I wasn't making enough money to eat. It was the first, and that was like a winter in London, 2002, 2003, and it was pretty heart wrenching. I was working odd bins, and I was standing behind a counter. So I'd gone from being, PhD guy, lecturer, tutor, respected, to shopkeeper, basically in London, and it was super. It was horrendous to start with. To be honest, it was cold. I looked like I'd just come out of train spotting after that first 3 months. To be honest, like I really was. I was pretty bad. It was just tough. It's just a tough place if you don't have lots of money, right? So I'm living this London life. And then I'm just desperate for change. And I just started walking around. I took my PhD dissertation with me and I was wearing a suit and I started walking around places just desperate for a decent job. I wasn't tasting anything at this shop. This is Oddbins, when Oddbins was actually going down pretty hard at that time. There was no tasting. The occasional wines I got to see were complete rubbish. It was the bottom of the wine trade. It wasn't the ground floor. It was the sewer of the wine trade. And then I just happened to go into this place in Knightsbridge. And I went into this very posh shop in Knightsbridge, just around the corner from Harrods, and I was suited up and I had my dissertation. I'm like, have you got a job? And they were like, well, we do actually, kind of thing. And these people this was a posh wine shop. The men were in suits. They had waistcoats on in this wine shop. The women were wearing kind of office attire, selling wine kind of thing. So it was called La Reserve. And I was just so desperate. And I think, I think the PhD, the thesis got me over the line. I think they were thinking, this guy seems all right, but he's kind of interesting. And one of the guys I met with, his name's Mark Rainier, and people in the UK would know him. He's quite famous. He was one of the guys who restarted Brooklady Distillery, and his dad started the Beaujolais Nouveau race with Sterling Moss. So do you know what? I reckon he kind of wanted to hire me because he just wanted to tell people when they came in, I've got this Australian guy on the shop floor and he's got a PhD. I've got an Australian doctor selling wine for him. So the first 3+ months-ish were just horrendous. And then suddenly, my wage went up by 50%, which meant I could eat. I couldn't do much more than eat, but I could actually eat. But basically every day was tasting the greatest wines in the world. So they had 2 venues. They had one was in Knightsbridge and one was in Soho. So the Soho one was the top of Greek Street underneath a very famous whiskey shop, probably the most famous whiskey shop in London, which is called Milroy's of Soho. And they just bought that, or they bought the business essentially. And so I was running these fine whiskey place, fine wine place, and it was not unusual for 3 guys on a Monday night to say, we've just done a great deal. We've got £2,000 to spend tonight. We want 3 bottles of wine, Angus. What should we have today? And we're like, the 85 Clos de Menil from Krug's looking pretty good at the moment. The 61 Cos d'Estanel, yeah, that's pretty good. And I just got I went from the sewer to the penthouse, pretty much. In one excruciating, unbelievably. I mean, it might have killed me, that place, but in a really short period of time, I just got this job where it was the job that I imagined everyone had in the wine trade, but actually almost nobody did. And then I studied over there. I did WSET diploma over there, and I met up I became friends with a woman who's working at Berry Brothers. And so we would sit at the back of the class. I had my suit on because that's the way things were done, and she had her suit on, and they'd be like, we're doing Bordeaux tasting, and all the other people there who worked at Oddbins and worked at Majestic, they'd be like, oh, let's taste some wine, and they'd be crappy vintages of not great wine kind of thing. And then I'd say, what did you drink last night? She's like, well, I had 20 vintages of Le Pen. What did you have, Angus, last night? Oh, I had all the new 99 Rousseaus and Jean Bertins. And so I was incredibly lucky to just taste these wines, but it just gave, everything, those 2 years in London, that fine wine experience, I base everything off that. And that's actually why I went there. I went there because you could not do that in Australia at the time. You could not taste that. You could see occasionally the odd imported wine. I went there to dive in and immerse myself in the great wines of the world, and I was lucky enough to do so.
Wow. What an amazing time. I mean, you painted that picture so well. And I'm kind of just with you rattling off those wines, I'm just like here just shaking my head because it's just like far out, just Incredible.
And I left my who's now my wife and the mother of my children. She stayed in Australia, so we met, and she stayed here. She's English. She said, "There's no way I'm going back to that country." So I was there for 2 years, but pretty much by myself with not that many friends, and most of the moments I spent tasting, thinking about studying wine.
Incredible. Now, when did you move back to Australia?
So I came back in 2004. So and then did some retail. Kind of got ground floor retail in Sydney, which was not that much fun either.
Okay, a different type of retail. Tell me a little bit about that experience and what led you into kind of e-commerce.
So yeah, it was just, it's just what there was really at the time. I never really wanted to be a sales rep kind of thing. I always liked talking to people and communicating to people and trying to get them into wine. So that was just, I'm kind of a personable guy. We wanted to have a family quite quickly because my wife's a bit older than me. So I didn't really want to be a sommelier and go that route. Even though I would have really enjoyed it because that's kind of what I did in London. But yeah, so got into retail, various jobs, some bricks and mortars job, bit of corporate retail, Wine Arc, we had quite a cool wine club that I ran. So I do tastings with, top winemakers and that kind of thing to kind of quite a posh audience. That was quite good. And then e-commerce came along. Really, about 2010, Dean had been the founder of Wine Arc, so I'd worked for him before, and he decided he wanted to get into e-commerce, and he had the concept behind Cracker Wines to start. And, we'd worked quite well together with Wine Arc, and he'd sold that for, a good amount of money. So he said, well, how about we do this Cracker thing? Essentially, let's get into e-commerce. And it was really e-commerce 2, I think. So there'd been Wine Planet, which hadn't really gone that well because there wasn't great technology and logistics and that kind of thing. But I think 2010, 2012, that was where, Cracker started, Vinamofo started. Dan Murphy's actually got a website rather than them just having a store finder that they had. And then e-commerce really kind of hotted up and the competition really hotted up.
These are the really founding kind of e-commerce wine platforms. Thank you. And then went on to the Wine Society and then merged, and now the Wine Collective. And that's, incredible to be part of something like that at the start.
It was, I tell you what, it's really hard because I had to try and get wineries on board and distributors and tell them you would sell wine on the interweb. And they just refused. They refused to believe me. I went into one winery. I won't tell you who it is. I went to one winery and there were these two blokes sitting there and they're looking at the computer and they go, so you're telling me that's going to sell wine? That thing in the corner is going to sell wine? And they just started, Dean and I were there and they started laughing in our face. Like literally laughing in our face saying, mate, I can't even turn that thing on. No one's going to buy from that. McLaren Vale at its finest.
Oh my gosh, that's very funny. I still to this day baffle my little brain when I think I'll have to tell my son that I was around before the internet came about. But what a time. But what I am always so inspired by and have so much admiration for you because you've had so many touchstones of the industry. You've tried and been successful in so many different elements. It's kind of just like the world is your oyster in terms of, I imagine, what you want to think of next and what you're going to do next. So tell me a little bit about kind of from there where you went. You founded Wine Pilot, you now do Vinous, you helped publish, if not the most incredible book on Australian wine that will probably ever be written. You've just done so much. And tell me about, what was your thought process? Did it just come along? Did you know all these things that you wanted to do?
I think I studied for the MW. Okay, I'm another failed MW, but I managed to pass theory. But I did 10 years of MW studies. That's 10 years of probably 20 hours a week. Right, so there's a lot of time thinking about wine and tasting wine and doing all that kind of thing, and not to mention money, right? So, but, I got so much information out of that experience, and that's just application. And I think that's given me quite a good understanding of what we are as an industry. And I think part of it relates to my kind of academic training in a way, but where we are in industry and where the holes are. Okay, just because, I think, and that's just a natural part of your brain, just if it takes on so much information, then I think it can just spit out some interesting ideas. So I'd done retail for a long time. I started in London in 2003. I was the chief marketing officer of the Wine Collective, and, we'd kind of done the merge between the Wine Society and Cracker. And I just done that. I'd written enough spam. I'd sold enough wine. The passion had gone. To be honest, the passion had gone. And so I kind of my kids are a bit older, so I didn't need to spend so much time with them. So I had time to invest in something. And I kind of looked at the wine industry and I just looked at, okay, where are the opportunities? Okay, e-commerce, I know how hard that is, super tough. Distribution, not really. Winemaking, do I want to leave? My wife would leave me if I said we were going to leave Sydney and her family. So I kind of looked at, but I had been writing though. I did have that to fall back on. I was the Gourmet Traveller Wine Young Wine Writer of the Year in 2006. I'd written regularly for Gourmet Traveller Wine. I wrote for The Australian for 10 years, for Wish magazine. So I kind of understood wine writing pretty well. And I looked at it from the outside and I went, okay, well, we've got these columns. Look at what's happening in the global media. That's going to change. These columns are going to be gone. And you know what, Shanteh? They pretty much all are now. Delicious is, doing its last print run as we speak. Gourmet Traveller Wine is gone. Wine State's gone. Gourmet Traveller magazine hardly does any wine. Good Living Epicure hardly does any wine. Like there's pretty much nothing left. There's Max's column in the AFR. There's Nick's column in the Australian. There's obviously Halliday magazine as well. But aside from that, in terms of rich content, there's nothing. Okay, we've lost 90%. Okay, and we used to have this great way of connecting with our consumers, right? So that was all going to happen. We all knew media was changing. This is all was going to happen. And I looked at, and I had technical background. I worked at Aldi for a couple of years. I ran e-commerce for Aldi for a couple of years, in the middle of 2 stints at Cracker. So I kind of understood how websites kind of work. I kind of understood that there was going to be a market. I kind of understood the industry wasn't actually telling a story, and that some of the other wine platforms, I thought could do a better job. I mean, women, for example, Shanteh, when I started Wine Pilot, there were 15 people doing wine reviews, doing points, et cetera, there was only one woman out of 15. So 14 men, one woman, Jane Faulkner. So a bunch of platforms didn't even have a woman and had never had one. Kind of thing. So, and there was certainly, I was going to say no one under 80. That's a bit unfair, but there was, it was a mature base of people. So I kind of went, what does the wine industry need? Firstly, it needs on-demand content. It needs people to not just wait for a book to be published. They need to see the wine and get it because they need to sell booze, and that's what I used to do as a retailer. They need younger voices. They need women. For God's sake, pardon me. Women buy 55% of wine in the country. Do they really want to hear bright ruby, hints of peppermint and licorice with a lick of oak? Absolutely not. Okay. So the media was in a place that was just not future fit. Okay. And I went, right, well, I reckon I can have a good go at this. Basically. And so, started Wine Pilot about 5 or 6 years ago. And, now we've got a dozen writers, including the incredibly talented Shanteh Wale. But also, kind of what you very kindly mentioned earlier, part of it I see as me mentoring the next generation of wine writers and making them future fit as well. It's my pleasure to have, Erin wrote for me before she wrote for, Halliday and Parker. You've gone on to, Halliday as well. Jenny's obviously done lots of stuff, but, after she did reviews for me, Halliday's got doing reviews, all these, I'm very happy to play this part in the industry is to actually give these great people a place to publish. So we started with Wine Pilot, and then I met up with a young Andrew Kayard. Wine Pilot's, going, reasonably well.
Before we get to that, I want to share just a little snippet, and that is that I remember very distinctly walking during COVID, the first lockdown, feeling very lost in the world. And I went on walks because I didn't know what else to do with my time, and I felt very lost and disconnected. And so I would go for these 4-hour walks around Sydney trying to find trees and places that were beautiful, just to kind of keep me busy. And I know it wasn't supposed to be 3 or 4 hours, but it was. And I got a call from you, and you said very much what you did say. I'm after young female voices. I want to start Wine Pilot, and it's going to be this, this, and this. Do you want to be involved? And I was tickled pink, but I also didn't know if I could write. You know, I was so interested. I'd always kept journals my whole life. I thought I would be a writer and never and you called out of the blue. I think it was through Amanda. And I just remember thinking, how is this person willing to give me a go when they don't really know if I can write? And it was just pretty amazing of you to just go out there and look for people. And I'm forever grateful.
Well, look, thank you very much. And you're exactly the kind of people, and you're not the only one. There's more of you as well, but you're exactly the kind of people that our industry needs for the future. And what I recognised was you had personality. I'd seen some of your writing. I'd met with you, and I just, and we just having chats with you. You just seemed like, a kind of upbeat person who is just, has a passion. You're not doing it to be cool. You're not doing it to be hip. You're not doing it for free wine. You're doing it because you love it, and that's what I wanted. And then I also saw the sommeliers, to be honest, as being people connect well with a sommelier in a restaurant. Having someone who is a combined sommelier and a wine writer, that becomes more interesting to the end consumer. So your work with Amanda at Key was kind of pivotal in that early discussion. But you've gone on to do amazing things and still work for me, and I couldn't be happier for you.
I just wanted to say that because, what you're talking about and just founding Wine Pilot, like it's on a list of all these incredible things you've done. And I mean, this is just becoming now me just talking to you about what I think. But, I've heard you say a few times that you're a failed MW. There are a few MWs in the world. There are not many people that have done what you have done in your time. And it is so necessary for the future voice of Australia that people like you have taken the path they have. And I'm grateful that you did 10 years studying for your MW and then stopped, because we wouldn't have what we have if you had kept going down that path. And you might be divorced, let's face it.
Yeah. I'd be divorced. I'd probably be an alcoholic somewhere. No. But look, that's incredibly generous of you to say that. And I just like you, I'm very similar to you. I'm extraordinarily passionate about wine, and I'm in some ways afraid for our industry. I'm afraid that we exist in an old-fashioned wine industry that sometimes doesn't realise doesn't realise what it needs to do to stay relevant, and that's why that's what the last 5 to 6 years has really been about. Has been trying to, within Wine Pilot first, but then the Vintage Journal and the Arc and Vinous is all about trying to tell the great Australian wine story, both myself but also bring a posse with me as well.
Tell me, I'm going to get to the Australian Arc because it's fascinating and I really want to hear a little bit more about that. But you just brought up that we are in a tricky time. The answer isn't simple, but there are a lot of wineries out there that are struggling. In Australia, what is your advice, or what do you think perhaps we need to hear to move forward and be viable on an international scale, but also within our own domestic market?
Yeah, look, I think often the problem in the Australian market, I think, is just we're quite insular. Okay, we're a long way from the rest of the world, so we don't see, our international customers don't see us very often and tell us what they think about wine. So we're quite insular. A lot of our region, we're a big country, right? So if you're a great southern winemaker, you live, I think, 6 hours from Perth, which is the most isolated capital in the world. I'm not picking out Great Southern for any particular reason, but I'm just saying a lot of winemakers and winery owners live in an insular world, which is a bit of a bubble where they talk to local winemakers. They talk to their friends who inevitably like their wines. They seek out the opinions of critics and, friendly critics who are going to tell them what they want to hear, and they go about their business just thinking everything's going to be great. I hate to say everything's not going to be great. And this is not just, we really need to understand this. This is not just our industry. This is everywhere. Rioja, a premium wine region, the most famous wine region in Spain, most commercial wine region in Spain, they've got 250 million spare bottles sitting in sheds right now. Okay, so this is a global problem. This is a global glut. This is caused by, older generations, baby boomers drinking less, and et cetera, et cetera. There's the health thing. There's, younger people drinking, less but better. There's a whole bunch of things. So, basically, sitting still is not an option. That is probably the best advice I can give to people. Sitting still and listening. If you're not doing okay at the moment, then things are only going to get tougher. Okay. And I know the China figures. I know they look great. I know people saying great, 1.2 billion. I don't believe it. Okay. I've spoken to some people over there. I do not believe the wine might be going there, but if it doesn't leave the shelf, then that sale doesn't count. And that's what I believe is happening. I think this is shelf filling. So people need to move. If things aren't going well now, then you've got to try something. Regions need to try something. Individual wineries need to try something. At a national brand level, we need to try something. Sitting still, inertia will be the death of the wine industry. So what I would suggest to people is get out, learn, talk to everybody, talk to people around the world, get opinions, and work out how each brand can move out of this. I mean, if I had one thing that I was going to do, and I was a brand, and an opportunity, I'd also go for Chardonnay. If you are a producer who has a moderate sized winery, and you've got a bit of volume around, and you've got some routes to market, I think Australian Chardonnay is to be honest, I think it is our best foot forward for the next 10 or 20 years. In terms of quality, in terms of volume, I think last year it was the biggest volume wine that was produced in the country. So we've got a heap of Chardonnay. The world doesn't want Shiraz really anymore, or they want less of it. So if we're going to find something, Chardonnay, Cabernet, go your hardest.
I love that I've just asked you a question and you've totally answered it. There's no swings and roundabouts with you, and I love that. I really do, because it's actually information and advice that we can sink our teeth into.
I just think now's not the time to be nice to people, to be honest, really. I just think people, the local market is going to get tougher. Okay? International market's already tough. Like the tsunami's there. The tsunami is there. The time is to offend, to be honest. The time is to offend people. The time is to have arguments. The time now is to have fights, because if we don't make some serious moves in a whole bunch of different ways, the wine industry is going to look incredibly different in a relatively short period of time.
And I think you've done quite a bit of international judging as well. I suppose sometimes it's good to hear, I think, some of the harder truths of perhaps, people that live in Europe or close to Europe and what they're drinking. And like you said, they don't see our wines as much. And yes, our Chardonnay is bloody good and can rival almost any wines in the world. But if they don't see them and you're not talking about them and you're not shouting about them, then they are just going to go by the wayside. And what do you think in terms of, I don't own my own business in terms of, having a winery and making these decisions, but a lot of the time the first cuts that go when money is tight is marketing and spending money on kind of really getting your brand out there. And that's pretty hard, but is that the right decision?
Look, I think, to be honest, I think we need to spend more on marketing. I think, I've just had a piece published in WBM where I kind of talk about it, and that's basically saying we need boots on the ground. We need boots on the ground like we did in the 1980s. Each brand should have someone representing it somehow in some way. It could be a collaboration with a bunch of winemakers. We need to be knocking on doors around the world, kissing babies, pouring glasses of wine, having a chat to people to really, get the exports going. This is what our competitors do. This is what the French are doing in America. This is what the Italians are doing. They're there every day. And you only build relationships by being there, by working with people and getting things done. And right now, I would say you're exactly right. Now's actually the time to, spend money on marketing and find out how to better tell your message and do it.
Yeah, or even I think we are very pleasant people. We're friendly, we're open-minded, we're pretty damn easygoing. And I think that when you're in front of people, that comes across, but you have to be in front of them. They have to see your face and hear your Australian accent and see the passion. So
I completely agree. Going back to the 80s when people like, who would have been on the road then? It would have been like, Charlie Melton and those guys. They were on the road. They were saying hi to people. They were saying, go and have a drink with Jancis. That's what we need. Actually, and you're exactly right. Australia has a great personality. We're nice people. We've got great personality. We're personable. Why aren't we? That is a superpower for us that we need to use better.
And like I said, I'm talking out of my ass in terms of that. I don't, I'm not making this decision, but I do think like you said, we have a superpower, and we win people over pretty bloody quickly, and it would be nice to see people doing a bit more travel and winemakers and viticulturists. Let's see more viticulturists, but when they can get a spare moment, which must be pretty bloody difficult, but to get out there. But it's not an easy answer. I do encourage everybody to go and read your article. Where can they access that?
It's in the WBN magazine. So you need to be a subscriber, I imagine.
It is bloody good. Some very hard truths, but beautifully written, and it's probably something that I think everybody needs to. If you're in the wine business of any sorts, you need to read that. Let's talk a little bit about your work with the beautiful Mr. Kayard and what it was like being involved in the Australian Arc.
Look, to be honest, it's one of the great highlights of my professional career, without a doubt, if not the highlight. The book. Andrew had written this beautiful manuscript, and when we met up, there was every chance that that it may not come to fruition, that it may end up in a draw. I think probably Andrew would have got it published in some way, shape, or form, but I think best case scenario would have been a much shorter thing, and it wouldn't have had the beautiful imagery. And so the two of us together, I read it. And he was obviously passionate about it. And I knowing where the Australian wine industry was going, and this is 2001, it was just clear that, the industry is in a bit of trouble. We don't have a seminal text. If you want to point someone to a wine book that tells the Australian wine story, we don't have one. We don't have an Anthony Hughson Burgundy or a Clive Coates or anything like that, or Jasper Morris. We don't have that stuff. So it was just, for every reason, it had to be done. And I just went as this is what I do for Wine Pilot in the same way. It's like, this just has to be done. We just need to get this out there because it's a beautiful story. It's an amazing story, and it actually helps to elevate brand Australia. We're not just these people who came along in the 1990s with, heavy oaky Parkerized Shiraz. We have 240 years of history. So it's an incredible pleasure, raising the money, putting together the team, editing. It's a 4-week read full time just to edit a copy. So a lot of reading, a bit of blindness. But working with Andrew has been just such a pleasure. I'm so proud of what together we produce. But very much, I'm like the coach on the sideline though. Like Andrew's the star. He's the quarterback. He's the guy doing the jobs. I'm just the one who kind of helped to make it happen. But getting it done, launching it, going overseas. We did this launch in London about a year ago at 67 Pall Mall, which was just a day that I don't think any of us will ever forget. People in the room were just the good and the great of the English wine trade were there. The people who founded LiveX, the masters of wine from Berry Brothers, from, Christie's, from Sotheby's, from Neil Martin was there, Anne Kriebel was there. Everyone was there. Tamlin from Jancis was there. Everyone was there. And everyone was just visibly moved by Andrew and the speech. And it's, great pleasure. The awards are lovely to win too, but really just seeing what we've been able to achieve and the reaction from people when they've read it has been, an unbelievable pleasure for me.
I think it's a life work. I believe that Andrew said it took him 17 years of research. I mean, but to learn about our country in that way is just spectacular.
The thing that really drew me in is this is just, and I'm a wine writer, so I'm licensed to say this. It's just not another boring wine writer. It's not another boring story about soils and clones and all that kind of thing. Like, that works for cork dorks, and that's fine. But I'm saying boring for the general audience. This is a social and political history through the prism of wine. This life, death, pregnancies, disasters. Everything is in there. The light and shade of Australian life from the very start. And I think that's what that human element. Humanising our industry, I think that's really, for me, what makes it great. And then the imagery, we went to all these people. We got over 20,000 images submitted to us. We got that down to about 1,200, but I think they're a really important part of telling that story.
I have been harping on to Angus about desperately trying to get it on Audible because I'm lazy, but also I could listen to Andrew Kayard talk. He needs to do one of those ones where, he puts you to bed and brings up the covers and says, sleep time now.
That will happen, but it's actually not going to happen for a little while because we're actually not for profit and we still have debts. And I know that as soon as we put it on Audible, we'll hardly sell any books. So it's probably not going to happen for 3 years or something like that. But also, I think the thing about Audible, yes, the content's fantastic, but actually the imagery is unbelievable. And the imagery is vivid and beautiful. And I actually think people who only listen to it will only get really half of what they could from the ARC.
Totally. I totally agree with you. And I think for anybody out there coming up to someone's special birthday, if you're in the wine industry, the Australian ARC would be very well received as a gift. And I'm saying that to my husband, who doesn't listen to the podcast at all, but anyone that'd like to buy me an Australian ARC, I'd be very grateful.
and buy it from australianarc.com.
Perfect. Now tell me, I've got a couple more questions that are a little bit more challenging. See how you go with them. Wine writing, how do you do it well?
You think about your audience. I think that's the key. I think what we have done as an industry, and this is not just in Australia, this is an international problem. We love our subjects so much and we get so into it that we tell these stories that are kind of interesting to us, but not necessarily interesting to the punter. So, whenever you're writing, or, not whenever you're writing, whenever anyone's writing, they should think about what does the audience want to hear? And the psychologist in me always comes out as like, how can I tell a certain story? How can I make it as exciting as possible, or as interesting, as engaging? How can I give someone something they're going to take away and it's going to change their life? So that's what we should all try and do every day.
That's beautifully said. Now tell me also, what would you like your legacy to be in this industry when you look at the long term?
Look, Australia, our story is just not told very well. Internationally, I would like to change that. Or not personally, obviously, but being a part of a change in that. I think the Australian ARC is a very good start for that. I think my column with Venice, really, I think Antonio and what we are doing as a team is just really of the highest order and highly respected globally. And I think, I work, I bleed, blood, sweat and tears when I'm writing those articles. I really try and tell the Australian story in an honest way, but really try and connect with, trade and industry consumers. So that hasn't really been done, that well. So, and then also, that's an international level, but then also at a local level with Wine Pilot and the Vintage Journal and, the South Australian Wine Guide and that kind of thing, making wine approachable, making it interesting, keeping wine writers like you, Shanteh, keeping you employed in this industry, finding a way to make sure that we get new wine writers coming through and we don't lose them, because if the industry is not willing to, there's a reason why there's no newspaper columns anymore pretty much, and no magazines, et cetera, et cetera. It's because the industry, to be honest, haven't had that much respect for the wine media and haven't thought it was worth supporting, which I think is partially why we're in a bit of trouble. So, what I would like to see is a viable wine media, viable models where, wine writers are paid, the wineries get content that helps them tell their story. And I think that's actually super important, that the wine industry stays relevant, is creating that content and connecting with our consumers, especially in an AI world, which throws at a whole bunch of crappy content that means nothing. Actually having content that is meaningful and well written and helps connect our industry to, consumers both here in Australia, but also around the world.
It's not an easy job, but you're certainly doing your part, and I'm forever grateful that you have taken this route in life and the constant vigilance that you do your job with. We're running out of time, so I'm going to have to ask you, if you're going to only drink 3 drinks for the rest of your life, Angus, what are they going to be and why, just for today?
3 drinks for the rest of my life. Well, they have to be wine, because I'm not really a spirits dude. I do like sparkling water, but I think that wouldn't be it. It's so hard when you taste so much wine. It's so bloody hard.
Well, that's why I said today, because you can change your mind for tomorrow.
I know. Australian Chardonnay. A great Australian Chardonnay. It could be Vas Felix Heytesbury. It could be Gioconda. It could be a whole bunch of people in Beechworth, Adelaide Hills, Yarra, Tasmania. Great Chardonnay, but not anemic thin Chardonnay, with full flavoured, delicious balanced Chardonnay. So that'd be one. Pinot Noir, absolutely. Just great Pinot from anywhere. To be honest, yes. There's lots of great Pinot from around the world. Just lovely, a silky Pinot, 5 to 10 years on it. Just starting to get in that earthy place, but with that velveteen kind of satiny kind of texture, with some nice, duck of some description. Then, God, it's so hard. Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley.
Oh,
there you go.
Classy. You're a class act.
I'm going. I mean, some people are going to shoot me. They'll say it's un-Australian. We don't do many great Chenin Blancs in Australia, so there's only one place you could go, and that would have to be the Loire Valley. Saumur or Sauvignon or something like that. Just beautiful, fresh, thirst-quenching wines.
The grape that can do it all. I love that answer. And I think you've done yourself justice with those very good answers. Angus, we could talk all day, and we often do. I absolutely adore what you have done for this industry. You have so much authenticity, so much grit and gumption behind what you do, and I'm just such a huge fan and forever grateful that you came into my life. Thank you for everything. And I hope that our paths cross soon and we can have a drink together.
No doubt, Shanteh. But also thank you. Thank you for this fabulous podcast. But also, you are exactly the kind of person this wine industry needs. It's passionate, knowledgeable, not arrogant. Someone down to earth. You are exactly, you and I are hopefully exactly what the industry needs to stay relevant.
Let's hope so. Let's hope they don't hate us at the end of this podcast.
Indeed. We'll see. Well, there's a Molotov cocktail just coming through the window. There we go.
I love it. Thank you so much, Angus, and cheers to you.
See you, Shanteh. Bye.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.